Tonight, a Muslim doll graces the stage in the iconic Barbie movie. And China claims it has busted a CIA network after arresting an important employee. And later in the show, we bring back something from our archives, a conversation with Sound Vision's Director of Religious Education on how we can teach children about puberty.
The Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ never shied away from this topic.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. This is Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. I am Saamiyah Syed. Amina Ali, a British Pakistani content creator, has appeared in the groundbreaking movie Barbie, representing a Muslim version of the doll. Ali was scouted through London agency BAME, which spotlights Asian and Black models. She appears briefly in a scene titled Row of Barbies, portraying diversity. Ali, a fashion-savvy individual, appreciates the coral-toned suit and peach hijab chosen for her. The film showcases diverse appearances and backgrounds, empowering young viewers. Ali is one of 3 Muslim women featured, promoting representation and breaking stereotypes. The film is directed by Greta Gerwig, making it the sole woman-directed movie to have grossed over $1 billion. Since its release, the film has become the second highest-grossing film this year. The iconic Barbie doll, often criticized for lack of diversity, has evolved with new versions that promote inclusiveness. The latest dolls include Barbies with hijab, Barbies in different shapes and sizes, and Barbies with special needs. 13 more bodies have been recovered from the sea after a boat carrying Rohingya passengers capsized and sank off Myanmar's coast last week. 2 bodies had been recovered on Thursday. Burmese media reports the boat sank off the township of Sitwe, located in the western coastal state of Rakhine. 8 other survivors were arrested and are being held at a local police station in Sitwe. Around 55 Rohingya had sailed off Raithdong Township on August 6th when the boat sank. They were headed to Malaysia. China has arrested an important confidential employee who it claims has been passing secrets to the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. China's State Security Ministry says the staff member surnamed Zhang was part of a Chinese military-industrial group. He had been detained for review and prosecution. Zhang had been accused of working for the CIA through its alleged Rome-based station officer named Seth. The 52-year-old defense firm employee was sent to Italy for studies by his unit during his career, where he became acquainted with the alleged CIA agent Seth. The Chinese ministry alleges Seth is an employee at the U.S. Embassy in Rome. The Chinese ministry says it has evidence that Zhang was conducting espionage activities. It says after making Zhang psychologically dependent on him, Seth asked for sensitive information about the Chinese military. The ministry says Seth in return promised Zhang a huge amount of remuneration and promised that Zhang's family would migrate to the United States. The ministry says Zhang agreed and signed an espionage agreement with the U.S. side and accepted the assessment and training from the U.S. The ministry is accusing Zhang of providing a large amount of China's core information to the U.S. and collecting espionage funds from the CIA. Beijing's claim of busting the CIA spy network came weeks after the CIA's director said their agency had made progress in rebuilding networks in China. For an insightful segment on how to teach children about puberty, stay tuned and we'll be right back. Now, our next guest is a regular on Canadian Muslim News. Sister Dhahira Appard is the Director of Religious Education with Sound Vision, and she's joining us now to speak more about Muslim Home's issue, teaching boys and girls about puberty. Welcome, Sister Dhahira, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's always nice to be here.
Mhm. Sister Dahira, tell me why you chose the theme to be around teenagehood and puberty, this issue.
We know that it's very important that boys and girls have really good information about the changes that are going to take place in their bodies as they reach adolescence. And we also know that there are some cultural confusion, I think, in many instances amongst the Muslim community about talking about these topics as some kind of taboo, as something that's uncomfortable and something that's avoided. We're trying to make sure that Muslim parents have good information in their hands to move forward in a very healthy manner for themselves and for their children.
And we'll talk more about the culture and the taboo later on. But in one of these articles, you gave a breakdown of tips and suggestions for parents to use when they're talking to their kids about puberty. If you could summarize some of the most important suggestions or things that resonate with you, what would you share with us?
Let me start with maybe five because the list was much longer. But I think to start off with, you have to make sure that in your own head, you are not looking at this point in your child's life with fear and trepidation. It's really a tremendous opportunity for growth. And if we stay positive about it, so can our children. It's also important that we be good role models. If we have hangups about our own bodies or afraid to talk about natural functions of our bodies, it's quite possible that that will translate to our children and it will keep them from asking questions of us. It's really important that parents stay good resources for their children. When they avoid certain topics, the children look elsewhere for information. And particularly in a non Muslim society, they can find lots of information out on the internet or from their friends, but I can pretty much be assured that that is not going to be in concert with our Islamic values. And last but not least, I would say that it's critical for parents to stay present, to be paying attention to their children's words and also their actions. Sometimes the things that confuse them or they have questions about are difficult for them to talk about too. And we sometimes have to open those doors of communication.
Mhm. Now, in another one of your articles, it says that menstruation is often discussed or thought of as a taboo topic, when really Islam uh, discusses something quite different. Can you share just exactly what Islam thinks on menstruation and how that does not make it a taboo?
So we know that Allah has created us in the most perfect form, and part of who we are as women involves our reproductive capacities. In order for us to reproduce, we have to go through a menstruation cycle, and the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam never shied away from this topic. So that when Muslim families think that it's not okay to talk about these things, they're really doing so from a cultural perspective rather than an Islamic perspective. That too is true in the area of sex education. And again, that's another area that is really confusing for kids and something parents sometimes try to avoid as well.
Mhm. Now, for a lot of parents, this is quite an awkward and somewhat uncomfortable conversation. I've heard many times where parents will forego the entire conversation because either their parents didn't have it with them or just because they're uncomfortable themselves. What advice would you give to these parents who are feeling those?
So, if you are afraid of the topic or nervous about talking about it, it's okay to share that with your child. If you share your own experience, that makes you human. That shows that you also had trouble in this area, and it'll be something that they'll be able to relate to. I was a principal of a very large Islamic school, and I remember many of my staff members and also teen students talk about when they got their period or started menstruating and saw blood, they thought they were dying. In this day and age, that is just atrocious. And Muslim parents really need to push through any kind of fear or hesitation they have themselves. Really, going back to that first point I made is really important. Thinking of this time in their lives as an opportunity rather than something to be fearful of.
Mhm. And that conversation itself, if I took away anything from the week's issue is that the conversation that you have with girls and the conversation that you have with boys looks a little different. How would you go about that conversation?
So I have boys and girls and have had to have those conversations, and my husband has had too. With girls, the girls are going to start menstruating, so you don't have a way of avoiding that. For boys, there are signs that are happening in their lives that you can see. Physical changes, they're growing taller, they're growing maybe facial hair, pubic hair, hair under their arms, maybe even their voice is changing. Their moods are usually changing too. So there's lots of outward signs that that will alert you to the arrival of puberty for boys. But menstruation is something that's going to come whether you like it or not if you have daughters. And so you're going to have to be buying feminine hygiene products. You're going to have to be talking about cleanliness. And in both of these areas, not only are our children changing physically, psychologically, and emotionally, but also spiritually. When puberty hits, they are required to pray. They are required to fast. They are accountable for their sins. And it's important that we lead up to this time with good information. So these are not changes that happen without any forewarning or without any opportunity for discussion and information. Another thing I wanted to point out, we had a book review in this issue as well. And that was for a book called Guy Stuff. And it's a great book about the details of the physical, psychological changes. It's written by a non-Muslim. Books on these topics are great to have around because your children can consult them themselves. And if you make them available, you can also say, if you happen into anything that you have a question about, I'd love to talk to you about that.
Mm-hmm. You know, culturally, I've noticed that it falls often on the shoulders of the mother to have these conversations with her child. But based on what you just said, it seems that both parents have to be involved. What is the role of each parent and how can they work together to have this conversation?
So our children naturally model after the same-sex parent. And so it would be very difficult for a mother to have a conversation with her son about a wet dream, for example, because we've never experienced that ourselves. Or it would be different for a father to talk about the pain of menstruation and what you can do about that pain if he has no way of knowing how that feels himself. So it's quite natural for the parents of the same sex child to have these conversations and have them from a meaningful place. Now, I want to caution that that doesn't mean the parent of a different sex child should avoid the conversation. I've heard too from students or from staff members who tell me that even during the time of the month that they were menstruating, which is a time that girls do not have to pray, girls and women, their mother would make them come to prayer and stand in the line when their father started the prayer for Fajr, let's say, so that the father wouldn't know they were on their periods. Now, this is, again, ridiculous because menstruation is a very natural part of our bodily functions. And again, Allah made us in a perfect sense so that we can't question whether or not that's the best thing that happens. Here's another thing that I think is a really good opportunity. When my two daughters started their menstruation cycles, I took each one of them out to dinner. I bought them a special pair of earrings. I wrote them a card that talked about how wonderful it was for them to reach an incredible milestone in their lives, which is the ability to reproduce. That's an amazing gift that Allah has given us, but it comes with a price. Sometimes that's inconvenience and sometimes pain each month.
Mm-hmm. And that definitely resonates with me too. I know in my culture, when a girl goes through puberty, gets their menstruation cycle, you know, they throw a party for them. And so I definitely see the resonance there. Thank you so much for your time, Sister Dahira. We don't have any more time left for today, but it was a pleasure having you on the show to speak more on this topic that many people consider to be a taboo. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. That's it from our Toronto studios tonight. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more Canadian Muslim content. Stay safe, and until next time.